censored number 60, and it's entitled, "No More Tax Reform, Please." He that oppresseth the poor to increase his riches, and he that gives to the rich, shall surely come to want. Proverbs 22, verse 16. Every tax reform measure enacted by Congress in the last 57 years has hurt the little guy and benefited the rich. Now Congress is taking up tax reform again. The talk is of tax cuts to stimulate the economy. But no one is asking why we would need to stimulate an expanding economy. No one is asking why do conservative Republicans always seek an overheated economy? Why do they always seek to return us to the days of boom and bust? What's their hidden agenda? Why do they wish to destroy Social Security, Medicare, and welfare? Why do they want to devolve all important federal functions to the states? Censored has pointed out many times that the conservative character structure is a mystic. He believes in God and believes all morals derive from God. He believes that the United States is God's chosen country. The conservative character prides himself as having principles and convictions. The political conservative hates federalism and believes more in provincialism. He's anti-government. In his heart of hearts, he would prefer to be rid of government, which he considers is an out-of-control behemoth. All of this psychological baggage is behind every action taken by the conservatives in and out of Congress. Political conservatives deal mostly in the abstract. When they want to cut Social Security, they don't think in terms of getting more money from the rich. They develop devious plans to cut the consumer price index. Instead of improving the system, they seek to privatize it and gamble the trust fund money away in the stock market. They have no faith in the United States government. All their faith and trust resides in the private sector and in the free market. The conservative Republicans in Congress are crass ass-kissers for corporate America. This is the stuff of their budget deals and their tax reforms. Though they try to portray themselves as populists, there exists no proof or evidence that conservatives have any populist bones in their bodies. It has never been shown that conservative Republicans had the little guy's interests in mind when they developed policy or write laws. All they have going for them is their principles, convictions, and their counterfeit Christianity. These are the facts. Today, the average American family is paying close to half its annual income in federal, state, local, and hidden taxes. The present tax system, with its loopholes for the rich, is intolerable and certainly not fair. Today's tax system was enacted in 1986 under Ronald Reagan by both Democrats and Republicans. Reagan promised if he was elected, he would help the middle class and those in New York's South Bronx. he helped neither. In 1986, the tax base was broadened again to include those receiving Social Security, and the payroll tax was nearly doubled. In order to give tax relief to the rich and corporations, the little guy had to pay more. In order to make ends meet today, the average American family man or woman has to work 2 jobs, where once a single job would do. We have forgotten the basic rule of taxation. Tax those with the ability to pay. The first income tax during Abraham Lincoln's administration taxed the rich. The first constitutional income tax in 1913 taxed the rich. It wasn't until the 1940s that the tax base was broadened to include the middle class. Ever since World War II, it's been an incremental attack on those of us who earn a paycheck. It's estimated that yearly, the Internal Revenue Service fails to collect over $200 billion in taxes due, most of it from the rich. This is enough to wipe out our annual deficit. Well, actually it was at this time. This is obscene. And still, we have ignorant people applauding the conservative Republicans who call for a balanced budget by tweaking downward the CPI and giving us more tax reform and taking housing out of the CPI. The CPI doesn't need to be tweaked downward, as advised by the Boskin Commission. In fact, the CPI needs to be tweaked upward. We must not be fooled by talk of flat taxes, consumption taxes, and value-added taxes. The only real tax reform we need is to tax the rich. Tax those with the ability to pay. The rich should be paying Social Security taxes and Medicare costs. This isn't class warfare. It's only economic fairness. Our tax policy must be brought into line with reality. The rich entrepreneur must understand that his products can't be sold if consumers don't have the money to buy. This maxim seems to be lost on those who tout international trade. How can we hope to sell abroad to citizens who can't afford our products? Many of us can't believe that our elected officials might have emotional or character problems. A lot of us fail to recognize the pathological nature of conservative ideology. We fool ourselves into believing that these people have our best interests in mind when they draft law. We fail to ask the big question: how can a mystic who believes in a God he can't prove exists govern in a secular milieu? He can't, and that's the problem. The conservative can't govern on earth because his head is in heaven. These are two different realms which require different laws and policies. In the late 1970s, the so-called liberal president, Jimmy Carter, taxed unemployment insurance and lowered the capital gains tax. Today, Social Security and state disability payments are taxed. It shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone why the little guy is having such a rough time financially. We should keep in mind, however, that we allowed all of these attacks on our pocketbooks. We didn't protest these changes. Since we outnumber the rich, how is it that they continue to get all the tax breaks? Tax breaks of $500 per child have no chance of stimulating the economy. So these tax cuts were mere political objectives. During the 1980s, two worker families rose by 20%. The poor by 7 million between 1989 and 1993, from 13% to 15% of the population. America's tax rates are the lowest among advanced nations. The economies of these nations don't seem to mind. They keep chugging along. But here in America, every little tax hike that targets the rich is said will harm our economy. It can't be stressed too often. A fair tax is one that takes into account one's ability to pay. If this is lost sight of, we become like Kings Herod, Saul, and Solomon, who tried to wring money from the poor. Even some conservatives admit that the rich should pay the highest percentages. The first income tax was enacted in 1862. It taxed amounts between $600 and $10,000 at 3%. Amounts over $10,000 were taxed at 5%. In 1864, the top rate went to 10% and was then reduced in 1867 and repealed in 1872. In 1894, the Democrats instituted an income tax with a rate of 2% on incomes over $4,000. The Supreme Court declared it unconstitutional in 1895. And again, when the income tax was enacted by constitutional amendment in 1913, the rich were taxed. In 1921, the top rate was 73%, which was lowered to 25% in 1925, just before the Great Depression. Between 1932 and 1982, the top rate never dropped below 63%. Under President Kennedy, in the early 1960s, the top rate was reduced from 91% to 70%. Throughout our nation's history, it has always been a sound economic principle to tax the rich at high rates. Today, the income tax provides about 43.5% of total revenues, while the payroll tax produces 36% of budget receipts. The corporate tax that once provided 30% of federal revenues now chips in 12.5%, which is lower today, by the way. Gift and estate taxes contribute $15 billion annually. 2/3 of married couples pay more taxes than if they were divorced. Tax reform is certainly needed, but this Congress and this White House is not the one to undertake it. In 1973, the IRS audited about 400 tax shelters. By 1984, this number grew to 350,000. These tax shelters diverted productive capital from being invested in productive assets. Because of such loopholes for the rich, the little guy's taxes were raised. Basically because the little guy is an easier mark. Between 1972 and 1983, the CPI rose 138%. And since we know that the CPI is understated, this figure was most likely much higher. In 1966, 155 taxpayers with adjusted gross incomes of $200,000 or more paid no income taxes. Social Security became taxable in 1983. Only those with half their brains tied behind their backs will be unaware that the income tax, which began as a tax on high income, has become a tax on the masses. And with each tax reform taken up by Congress, things have gotten worse. Now there is talk of consumption taxes, which impose greater hardships on the young, the poor, and the elderly. The incomes of the rich will always be greater than their consumption. A consumption tax favors capital-intensive industries over labor-intensive ones. The consumption tax, like the flat tax, lacks fairness. Expansion of the tax base lies at the heart of the flat tax. Even Adam Smith understood the real fairness angle concerning taxation when he said, "The subjects of every state ought to contribute towards the support of government as nearly as possible in proportion to their respective abilities." In 1993, people with adjusted gross incomes over $75,000 paid 50% of all income taxes. These 7.5 million out of 107 million tax returns represent 7% of the total. There's a lot of money at the top. 80% of taxpayers will never make $75,000 in their lifetimes, a year in their lifetimes. Yet many of them have fallen for the conservative carrot and stick fantasy of economic upward mobility. For all practical purposes, there is no economic upward mobility in America. Tax reform since 1977 has cut in half the top rate paid by the richest Americans. Social Security taxes aren't paid by those who make more than $62,700. That figure is now a little higher. Why? The Social Security tax has been raised 9 times since 1977. When dealing with tax reform, the words of Isaiah ring true. Everyone is a hypocrite and an evildoer, and every mouth speaks folly. Isaiah 9, verse 17. The rich have always claimed that a tax system with high marginal rates will reduce incentives for productive activity and will result in lower growth. Low marginal rates create incentives to work, save, and invest. The history of America proves otherwise. Our best economic years occurred while we had high top tax rates. As we lowered these top rates, cut the corporate tax, and broadened the tax base, our economy has slowed, corporate America has downsized, jobs have been lost, and poverty rates continue to climb. Social welfare spending has increased from $52.3 billion in the 1960s to $672 billion in 1984. This isn't because people are too lazy to work. It's because the private sector has failed the worker. 44% of all new jobs are low-wage ones. Middle-income jobs have all disappeared. 1/3 of all new jobs since 1980 have been part-time ones. Poverty in old age for President Franklin Delano Roosevelt was a byproduct of modern industrial life. At first, during the Great Depression, he experimented with a pro-business strategy, but it didn't work, and it doesn't work today. Corporations today view tax credits and write-offs as profits, but these don't produce anything. Today, prices rise faster than wages. Between 1977 and 1981, consumer prices increased 50%, but average weekly earnings rose by only 35%. During the Great Depression, wages also never kept up with prices. How can those in Congress with salaries over $100,000 yearly understand the working man and woman's plight? They can't. Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich, in referring to his 171 plus salary, said he wasn't a rich man. But compared to someone who earns $25,000 or $30,000 a year, Newt was a rich man. A supermajority of Americans will never make more than $35,000 a year in their whole lives. Real tax reform would raise the top rate on most first-year income, not on lottery winners, and on nearly all second-year income. The rich must pay Social Security taxes and Medicare costs. The payroll tax could then be cut in half. That would be a real tax cut. The corporate tax must be increased, and certain write-offs must be canceled. One dirty little secret of business is that wages account for 70% of the cost of doing business. But these costs are deductible. This is much like the dirty little secret of the stock market, that a stock only earns money for a business when it's first issued. After that, it's gambling fodder for Wall Street. The stock market is a gambling machine that adds nothing to speak of to the economy. Those in Congress and business who want to privatize Social Security, want to invest the trillions of dollars in the trust fund into this gambling machine. We should be aware of tax reform that begins in Congress or the White House or in conservative think tanks, or comes from political parties and deceived individuals. Real tax reform must again be infused with the notion that those with the most must pay the most. This is true fairness. This has historically been proved to be good for business for government, for individuals. Otherwise, we must say, no more tax reform, please. And I'd like to read this. In the 1980s, while Ronald Reagan was president, the Social Security Administration tried to throw tens of thousands of people off Social Security disability. An unwritten law was instituted which denied benefits to first-time claimants to rid the process of those who lacked persistence. A report dated January 1997, prepared by Social Security Administration's General Counsel, and a letter by former Commissioner Shirley Chatter were distributed among Social Security Administration's top executives. They proposed an illegal policy which would end the authority of 900 administrative law judges. The report demands that the judges follow agency policy instead of federal law. The judges are to attend training classes so they can learn agency policy. Today, appeals of Social Security Administration denials of benefits are reversed by administrative law judges in 62.5% of cases. The report is an attempt to intimidate the judges and obstruct due process. Social Security Administration wants to deny benefits to millions of needy Americans. This is obviously a sneaky, conservative trick to cut the Social Security disability rolls. Social Security has to pay claimants lawyer fees when they lose. So if the agency could win more appeals, it could save more money. But there's a better way to save money. Stop denying claims. The end.
Hi, this is William Morrow. Are you one of those people who join a health club, and after they have your big, overpriced annual membership, you notice that you're on your own with little or no results even after all the promises? Then the website Personal Trainer is for you.
Thank you very much, William H. Morrow III.
So you lost another argument with a conservative, right-wing Republican. He talked over you. He screamed and yelled. He brought out the Bible. He thumped it. He quoted scripture to you. You were lost because you came at him with facts. Nothing but facts. And you expected that would make you look good. That would make you win the argument, but it didn't. You know why you lost the argument? You know why you're going to lose your next argument? Because you don't read Censored. Censored, a 30-year-old newsletter that shows you how to defeat a conservative. Read Censored, and you'll have all the ammunition you need. Every time you get into an argument with a right-wing conservative, so-called Christian. Censored. That's all you need. Read it and defeat a conservative.
Greetings, listeners. Let me speak to you for a moment about the foundation of our entire organization, Newsletters Censored. It was founded by our mentor, the Reverend Dr. William J. Eisenman, in 1977. It discusses the 5 taboos of American life: politics, religion, health, human sexuality, and child rearing. You won't find anything like this in the mainstream media and the press. It reveals the kind of truth that most people are afraid to hear. Can you handle it? We are living in the end times, so in order to defeat a conservative and save America, you need Newsletters Censored. Go to www.newslettercensored.com, click on the printable order form page, and with your gift to support this work, get your free annual subscription. This is James P. Madonna of Megalife 21, the hardest hitting internet talk radio station on the planet.